The gun went off at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and Sarah Chun heard it from half a block away. She'd just turned her 10-year-old Honda Civic onto Meridian Avenue, heading home after a 13-hour shift in the emergency room at St. Augustine Medical Center. Her scrubs smelled like antiseptic and something she'd learned not to think too hard about. Her feet hurt. Her lower back had been sending up protest signals since roughly hour 9. She had exactly one thought in her head: the leftover pad thai in the refrigerator and whether it was still good. Then came the sound. A single sharp crack that split the wet October air like a hand slapping a table. Sarah's foot hit the brake before her brain had finished processing what she'd heard. Through the rain-streaked windshield, in the amber cone of a streetlight 50 yards ahead, she saw them. 2 men, young, hooded, moving with the coiled urgency of people doing something that couldn't be undone, standing over a massive Harley-Davidson that had toppled onto its side on the shoulder of the road. The motorcycle's headlight was still on, cutting a pale slash across the wet asphalt like a dying eye. Beside it, a man in a leather jacket lay crumpled against the curb, one hand pressed to his side, the other raised in either surrender or defiance. It was hard to tell from here. One of the hooded figures had a gun. The other had a crowbar. "Drive away," said every reasonable instinct Sarah Chin possessed. "You have a phone. You have 911. That is what 911 is for." She sat there for 3 full seconds. She counted them later, replaying the moment in that particular loop the brain reserves for decisions that change everything. And then she thought about the angle of the man's body against the curb, the way his legs were positioned, the specific darkness spreading across the front of his jacket that was not shadow and not rain. He'd been shot, possibly in the abdomen, possibly in the chest. Either way, at 11:47 on a Tuesday night on a street where the nearest ambulance was at least 12 minutes out, he was going to die if nobody did something. Sarah Chin put the car in park and got out. She didn't think about courage. Courage was for people with time to prepare, people who saw the danger coming and had the luxury of being afraid first. What she felt was something older and more mechanical than courage. The same thing she felt every time the trauma bay doors banged open and the paramedics came in hot with someone on the edge of irreversible. A kind of narrowing. The world reduced to the problem in front of her and the specific set of tools she had to solve it. The problem in front of her was this: a man was bleeding out, 2 armed individuals were in the way, and she had approximately 90 seconds before the situation became unfixable. She left her headlights on. The light would help, and somewhere in the back of her mind, she calculated that 2 bright headlights at their backs might momentarily confuse them. She grabbed the small medical kit she kept in the passenger footwell, a habit her paramedic father had instilled in her so deeply it had long since become unconscious. She got out of the car, and she walked toward them. "Hey," she called out. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "Police are 2 minutes out. I already called." Both figures spun. The one with the gun, later identified as Kevin Marsh, 29, with 2 prior armed robbery convictions, pointed it at her. "Back up, lady," he said. "This ain't your business." Sarah kept walking. "He's been shot," she said, nodding past them at the man on the ground. "Whoever did this is looking at a homicide charge, not just an armed robbery. You want to be here when the police arrive." She watched Kevin Marsh's face, watched him calculate. His partner, Troy Suggs, 24, whose prior record was thinner but whose eyes were wilder, looked at him with the particular expression of someone who hadn't signed up for murder and was only now realizing that distinction might not matter. "She's got a phone," Troy said. She called the cops. "I can see she's got a phone, Troy. So let's shut up." Kevin took a step toward her. The gun was level with her chest. In the headlights of her car, she could see the rainwater running down its barrel. She stopped walking, but she didn't back up. What happened in the next 90 seconds was the kind of thing that would get replayed in courtrooms, written about in local newspapers, and eventually go modestly viral in the particular way that real stories sometimes do. Not with the clean narrative arc of a movie, but with all the mess and improvisation and luck of actual human events. What Sarah Chun did, according to the security footage from the automated parking kiosk 20 yards away, and to the accounts she later gave to police, was this. She waited until Kevin Marsh was close enough that the gun was more liability than advantage. Then she hit him with the medical kit. It was a hard-sided Pelican case, roughly the size of a laptop, and she swung it with both hands the way her father had once shown her you swing a baton. Short arc, maximum wrist snap, aim for the hands, not the head. The gun went skidding across the wet pavement. Kevin screamed something she would later describe to detectives as very creative profanity. Troy came at her with the crowbar. She stepped inside the swing. This was the thing no one quite understood when they read about it later. The thing that sounded impossible for a nurse in wet scrubs with tired feet after a 13-hour shift. She didn't actually fight them. She survived them. There is a difference. Her father had been a beat cop for 30 years before a bad knee forced him to retire, and he had spent a considerable portion of Sarah's childhood trying to teach her the distinction between looking dangerous and being hard to hurt. You can't out-tough someone who wants to hurt you, he'd said, more times than she could count. You make yourself expensive. You make it cost them. You buy time. She bought time. She absorbed the partial blow of the crowbar across her left shoulder. It would leave a bruise the size of a dinner plate, stepped sideways, grabbed Troy's arm, and used his own momentum to send him into the side of her Civic with enough force to crack the mirror. Kevin was scrabbling for the gun. She kicked it further away. Troy was dazed, but not down. Kevin found the gun, and then the man on the ground said, loudly and very clearly, "Behind you." Kevin turned. He saw nothing behind him. There was nothing behind him. But he turned instinctively, the way anyone does when a voice tells them to. And in that half-second, Sarah grabbed Troy's dropped crowbar off the ground and held it like she intended to use it. "Walk away," said the man on the ground. His voice was rough as gravel, what with something she recognized as fluid in the airways. "Walk the hell away right now." Kevin Marsh looked at the woman in the scrubs holding a crowbar. He looked at his friends slumped against a car. He looked at the man on the ground, who was looking back at him with eyes that had absolutely nothing afraid in them. Kevin Marsh ran. Troy Suggs, after a moment's deliberation, ran after him. Sarah dropped the crowbar and dropped to her knees beside the man on the ground, and the part of her that had been running on adrenaline and instinct handed the controls back to the part of her that had been doing this for 8 years. "I'm a nurse," she said. "Stay with me. What's your name?" The man looked up at her. He was big. Not just tall, but constructed in the way of men who had been physically capable their whole lives, broad across the chest, with hands that looked like they could close around a watermelon. His leather jacket was black, aged to the texture of something living, and across the back of it, in red and gold, was the Iron Fist logo of the Iron Black Motorcycle Club. He had a face like a cliff, all angles and weathered surfaces, and dark eyes that were beginning, she could see, to lose their sharp edges. "Jake," he managed. "Jake Torres." "Okay, Jake. I need to see where you're hit." "Left side," he said. "Went through, I think." She already had the Pelican case open. Her hands moved. "You always carry a medkit in your car?" he asked. "My dad made me." "Smart man. The smartest." "Jake, I need you to stay with me. Talk to me. Tell me something." "Like what?" "Anything. Where were you going tonight?" A pause. A wet, careful breath. "Home," he said. "Just going home." "Okay. Tell me about home." And Jake Torres, vice president of the Iron Black Motorcycle Club, with a through-and-through gunshot wound to his left flank and possible internal bleeding, lying on the wet pavement of Meridian Avenue at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, talked about home. He talked about it until the ambulance arrived. Sarah Chun was not, by any available metric, remarkable. She would have been the first to tell you this, and she would have been wrong, not about herself specifically, but about the category of person she imagined when she said the word remarkable. She thought remarkable meant large gestures, large personalities, large moments. It didn't occur to her that the most remarkable thing a person can do is show up, consistently, in the hard and unglamorous places, for years, and keep choosing the difficult thing. She had grown up in Garfield Park, on the west side of a city that was never in the running for anyone's most livable list. Her father, Ray Chun, had been a cop for 30 years. Her mother, Elena, had worked the register at a pharmacy for 20 of those same years until her back made standing impossible. And Sarah had grown up in the particular atmosphere of a household where the word duty was used without irony. Ray Chun talked about duty the way other fathers talked about sports teams, with conviction, with pride, with the casual assumption that everyone around him shared his values and would be baffled to learn otherwise. He had also, as it happened, spent a not inconsiderable number of Sarah's formative years teaching her how to not get killed. Not with the grimness of paranoia, with the practicality of a man who had watched people get hurt for 30 years and had come to see physical safety as a skill, like cooking or driving, that could be learned and practiced. He took her to self-defense classes starting at age 9. He made her carry a small trauma kit in her bag from the time she got her driver's license. He showed her, once, in the parking lot of a Costco, the exact mechanics of making someone's forward momentum work against them. "You'll probably never need this," he'd said, demonstrating the technique in slow motion. Then why are you teaching me? Because probably isn't the same as never. She had gotten into nursing the way some people get into it. Not from a single moment of inspiration, but from an accumulation of smaller ones, like water finding the lowest path. She liked helping people. She liked the concrete, practical nature of a problem that had a physical solution. She was good in emergencies, which she discovered relatively early, and which she came to understand was partly temperament and partly the fact that her father had spent years, in the specific way of his generation, calmly describing worst-case scenarios over the dinner table. 8 years in the ER at St. Augustine had given her what her colleague Linda Reyes called the 1,000-yard stare of a person who has seen everything and is somehow still here. This was not a complaint. It was, from Linda, a form of deep admiration. Sarah had seen people come in with nails in their skulls and ask about the wait time. She had held the hand of a 70-year-old man for 40 minutes while he died of something that didn't need to be as bad as it had become if he'd had insurance. She had talked down a man with a knife who had come into the ER threatening everyone because he was terrified and didn't know how else to be. She had saved a toddler by going into her own pocket for medication the child's parents couldn't afford. She was not remarkable. She was a nurse. For her, these were the same thing. She lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of a building in Wicker Park that had once been nicer than it was now, but was still nicer than she could comfortably afford. She had a cat named Biscuit who was 14 years old, mostly deaf, and had the self-possession of a retired senator. She drove a Honda Civic with 180,000 miles on it. She went running 3 mornings a week. Not because she enjoyed running, but because it was the most efficient use of 30 minutes for cardiovascular maintenance. She had 2 close friends and a small, warm family she saw on Sundays. She was not the kind of person who looked for trouble. She was, however, the kind of person who didn't know how to look away from it. You see someone in trouble, Rachel had said, more than once, usually at the dinner table on a Sunday, usually prompted by nothing in particular except whatever was moving through the back of his mind. You don't cross the street. You don't pretend you didn't see. You stop, and you help. That's it. That's the whole thing. The rest is just what you tell yourself, so you don't have to. Sarah had rolled her eyes at this every time. The way teenagers roll their eyes at their parents' beliefs when they suspect, underneath the eye rolling, that they are going to inherit them completely. She had inherited them completely. The official investigation later determined that the entire robbery, from the moment Kevin Marsh forced Jake Torres off his motorcycle at gunpoint to the moment Kevin Marsh ran, lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Sarah Chin's active involvement lasted 37 seconds. In those 37 seconds, she had walked 50 yards toward an armed man, called an imaginary bluff about police response time, taken a direct blow from a metal crowbar to her left shoulder, struck Kevin Marsh hard enough with the Pelican case to dislocate 2 of his fingers and send the gun skidding across the road, used Troy Suggs's forward momentum to put him into the side of her car, recovered the crowbar from the ground, and held off both men long enough for Jake Torres's voice, rough and damaged and utterly without fear, to close the deal. 37 seconds. She did not think of herself as brave. She thought, in the immediate aftermath, kneeling on wet asphalt with her hands inside a stranger's jacket trying to assess a gunshot wound, that she had been moderately stupid, and that it had worked out, and that she was intensely grateful that it had worked out, because if it hadn't worked out there would have been nobody left to do what needed to be done for the man in front of her. Jake Torres was in bad shape. The bullet had entered his left flank. He'd been right. It appeared to have passed through, but the trajectory worried her. Too close to the kidney. Too close to the descending colon. She could see from the character of his breathing that the lung wasn't involved, which was the good news. The bad news was internal bleeding. There was no version of a scenario involving a high-velocity round and the structures in that part of the abdomen that didn't involve internal bleeding. She worked with what she had. The Pelican case contained latex gloves, gauze pads, tourniquets, medical tape, a SAM splint, 2 doses of epinephrine, and a packet of Quick Clot combat gauze. The last item another gift from her father, who had become interested in combat medicine after reading about it in a magazine. She used the Quick Clot. She packed the wound. She kept pressure on it. And she talked to him. Home, she'd said. Tell me about home. He'd thought about it for a moment. She could feel him thinking about it, the effort of focusing through pain and blood loss. And then he'd said, house on the south side. Had it 12 years. Too big for one person. You live alone? Now I do. Something in the way he said it. She didn't ask. Is it a good house? Good bones, he said. Old oak floors. Back porch. I've been meaning to fix the back porch for 8 years. Boards are rotting. What's stopping you? A short sound that might have been a laugh. Never seems urgent enough. The classic, she said. How many floors? 2. 3 if you count the basement, and I don't, because nothing good happens in a basement. Agree, she said. Talk faster, Jake. Tell me about the first floor. She needed him talking partly because conversation required brain function and brain function required blood flow, and blood flow to the brain was something she was currently very focused on maintaining, and partly, if she was honest, because his voice, even damaged and waterlogged as it was, had a quality to it that was anchoring. Low and steady, like a frequency that cut through interference. He talked about the house, and she worked, and the rain came down on both of them, and in the distance the sirens began. She rode with him in the ambulance. She held his hand the whole way, because his heart rate was dropping and she needed to be able to feel it, and because, the truth she admitted to herself later, in the hollow quiet of 3 a.m., she had started, somewhere between the back porch and the first floor, to want him to make it for reasons that had nothing to do with professional obligation. Jake Torres had been in the Iron Black Motorcycle Club for 19 years. He had prospected at 22, been patched in at 23, earned the title of road captain at 30, and become vice president at 37, a role he'd held for 4 years and which suited him the way a well-worn saddle suits a horse that has been riding long enough to shape it. He was not loud. He was not flashy. He did not have the easy magnetism of men who needed to be seen. He had, instead, the particular authority of someone who had never needed to raise his voice because no one had ever seriously considered not listening to him. His phone had his club president in it under Ghost. Ghost, Marcus Williams, 52 years old, 17 years as president of the Iron Black MC, former staff sergeant in the United States Army, currently the owner of a legitimate and profitable motorcycle repair shop on the South Side, received the call at 12:23 a.m. Not from Jake. Jake was in surgery. The call came from Danny Cub Rivera, 23 years old, the newest prospect in the Iron Black MC, who had been awake at midnight because he was always awake at midnight because he was 23 and had the sleeping schedule of a person who had not yet discovered consequences. Danny lived 2 blocks from the hospital. He had heard the sirens. He had, on some restless impulse, gone to the window and seen which direction they were coming from. Then he had seen, scrolling through a local neighborhood app at 12:20 a.m., a post from someone who described seeing a woman in scrubs fight off 2 armed men to help an injured motorcycle rider on Meridian. Danny had looked at the post for a long time. Then he had called Ghost. Ghost was awake. Ghost was almost always awake at midnight, a holdover from years of night watch that his body had long since made permanent. He listened to Danny explain what the neighborhood app post said. He asked 2 questions, the hospital and the name. St. Augustine, Danny said, and the post says the guy's name was Jake Torres. A silence. Jake, Ghost said. It says he was shot, man. The post says, I heard you. A pause, not long, but with weight behind it. Call the chapter. Tell everyone St. Augustine now. I'm going. Ghost drove the 40 minutes to St. Augustine in 25, which was something he had never done in 30 years of riding, but which seemed, at 12:23 a.m. with Jake Torres in surgery, like the only reasonable option. He found the waiting room occupied by a woman in green scrubs with a makeshift ice pack on her left shoulder, a split in her lower lip, and blood on her hands that she had clearly been trying to wash off and hadn't quite managed. She was sitting in one of the plastic chairs with the particular posture of someone who has been running very hard and has just stopped, and she was staring at nothing with eyes that were present but somewhere else. Ghost had seen that expression on people before. He'd worn it himself. It was the expression of someone who had just done something that burned a lot of fuel and was now sitting in the aftermath while the system recalibrated. He sat down next to her. He was not, by most people's accounts, a comfortable presence. He was large, not in Jake's way, but in a quieter, denser way, the way of a man who had been strong for a long time and had learned to make himself smaller because the world had taught him, early, that making yourself smaller was sometimes the price of peace. He had a shaved head and a beard shot through with gray and a face that had been, over 52 years of living, rearranged in a few minor places. He was wearing a black jacket with the Iron Black MC's Iron Fist logo on the back. He sat down and said, quietly, "Are you the one who helped him?" Sarachan looked at him. She had not, in the stress-soaked blur of the last 45 minutes, thought once about what was going to happen after the hospital. She had not thought about the fact that she had helped a motorcycle club member, and that motorcycle clubs had members who would, upon learning what had happened, come to the hospital. She looked at the man beside her. She looked at the logo on his jacket. "I'm a nurse," she said. "I did what I could." "What you could," Ghost repeated, in a tone that made it clear he had already been told what she had done, and that "what you could" was the most significant understatement he had heard in some time. "I'm Marcus. Jake is my brother." He said it the way clubmen say it, not biology, but something older than biology. "How is he?" "In surgery. They'll let me know." She stopped. "I'm not family. They won't actually tell me. I rode in with him." Ghost looked at her for a moment. "You rode in with him," he said. "I needed to monitor his vitals. He'd lost a lot of blood. You held his hand." She blinked. "The paramedic told you that?" "The paramedic told Danny, and Danny told me." A pause. "Thank you." It came out rough, those two words, the way words come out when they are carrying more weight than words usually carry. He was not a man who said thank you lightly. She could hear the thing underneath it, the controlled enormity of it, and it made her throat tighten unexpectedly. "He talked about his house," she said, because she didn't know what else to say. "The back porch." Something moved across Ghost's face, a shift, quick and small, like a fault line adjusting. "He's been saying he's going to fix that porch for years. That's what he said. If he makes it out of that surgery," Ghost said quietly, "I'm going to nail those boards myself." They sat there, the nurse and the club president, in the bright nothing of a hospital waiting room at 12:45 in the morning, and waited. The surgery lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. The bullet had, as Sarah had suspected, clipped the left kidney and nicked the descending colon. Dr. Yusuf Adeyemi, the trauma surgeon on call, a quiet, methodical man who had trained in Cape Town and operated in 3 conflict zones before returning to civilian medicine, repaired both, controlled the internal bleeding, and emerged at 4:56 a.m. to speak to the collection of large, leather-jacketed men who had arranged themselves in the hallway outside the surgical waiting area with the quiet, contained tension of people who were used to waiting for bad news and had decided, collectively, that this was not going to be bad news. By then, there were 11 of them. Ghost had arrived first, then Danny Cub, who'd come on foot from his apartment down the road. Then, in ones and twos over the next 2 hours, the rest of the Iron Black chapter. Road Captain Dex, Sergeant-at-Arms Ray Bulldog Kowalski, Treasurer Mike Soto, and 6 other members whose road names and real names would eventually be recorded in the police report as witnesses to the public disturbance. The officer on scene's diplomatic characterization of 11 very large motorcycle club members occupying a hospital corridor. They had, to their credit, been entirely quiet. A hospital was a hospital. Even Bulldog, who had never been accused of subtlety in his life, seemed to understand that you don't raise your voice in a place where people are fighting to stay alive. Sarah had been there for all of it. She should have gone home. She knew she should have gone home. She had a 13-hour shift behind her and a crowbar bruise on her shoulder that was going to be spectacular by morning, and her adrenaline had been running on fumes for hours. But she'd stayed, first in the waiting room with Ghost, then in the corridor with the rest of them. And somewhere in the second hour, she had accepted a cup of terrible vending machine coffee from a man with dexterity tattooed across his knuckles and found herself in a low, quiet conversation about nothing in particular with a group of men who were, she thought, in the specific way of people accustomed to hard things, very carefully not thinking about the thing they were waiting to find out. They asked her what happened. She told them, plainly, without drama, the way she told things. What she didn't expect was the silence that followed. Not an uncomfortable silence. The kind that happens when a room full of people are processing something that doesn't fit into any available category. She watched Bulldog, who looked like he could lift a car, and probably had, sit with it for a moment. She watched Danny Cub, barely older than some of the patients she'd treated in the ER, blink several times with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral. Danny started. "You just walked toward the guy? With a gun?" "I walked toward him, yes." "Why?" She considered the question seriously. "Because if I didn't, Jake was going to die on that pavement. And that wasn't okay." Danny looked at her for a long moment. "Just not okay," he said, like he was trying the words out. "Just not okay," she agreed. When Dr. Adeyemi came out at 4:56 a.m. and said that Jake Torres was out of surgery, stable, and expected to make a full recovery barring complications, the exhale that went through those 11 men was like the whole building sighing. Ghost shook the surgeon's hand. He shook Sarah's hand. And then he said, very quietly, so only she could hear. "We don't forget things." She thought, at the time, that it was just something people said. She went home at 5:30 a.m. and slept for 6 hours. She woke to 47 text messages, 14 missed calls, and a voicemail from Linda Reyes that began with, "Sarah. Sarah, what did you do? Sarah, I am calling you immediately." Someone had shared the neighborhood app post. The post had screenshots of the parking kiosk security footage, which was grainy and dark but showed, with reasonable clarity, a small woman in scrubs walking toward a man with a gun. The post had been shared to a local Facebook group, then to a Reddit thread, then, by the time Sarah woke up at 11:30 a.m., to a Twitter account with 200,000 followers that specialized in everyday hero content. By noon, it had 400,000 views. By the time Sarah had showered, dressed, and eaten toast standing over her kitchen sink, because sitting down felt like a commitment she wasn't ready to make, her phone had buzzed 11 more times and Biscuit, her ancient cat, was regarding her with the deep, quiet suspicion of an animal who sensed that the household's equilibrium was under threat. "Don't look at me like that," she told him. He looked at her like that. She called Linda. "Sarah, what? You fought armed robbers. With a medical kit. And a crowbar," Sarah said. "Eventually. A crowbar. It was on the ground. It seemed efficient." Linda made a sound that was either a laugh or a scream, possibly both. "Are you okay?" "Your shoulder. I'm fine. It's bruised. I've had worse." "You've never," Linda stopped. "You know what? Never mind. How is the guy? The biker? Out of surgery. Stable." A pause. He talked about his back porch the whole time. His back porch. He's been meaning to fix it for 8 years. It helped. Kept him present. A silence. "Sarah," Linda said. "Linda, you're insane." "Probably. I also think you're the bravest person I know." "That's a very low bar, Linda." "It's not, though." Linda's voice had gone soft. "It's really not." The story spread in the way that true stories spread, imperfectly, with distortions, with details added and subtracted by each retelling, but with something essential at its core that survived all the transmission. The grainy security footage was everywhere. A local news station ran a segment. A reporter called the hospital. Dr. Patricia Webb, emergency department chief, who had known Sarah Chun for 6 years and who had once described her, at a departmental review, as the person I would most want in the room if I were dying, took the call, declined to comment on patient confidentiality grounds, and then walked down to the break room and told Sarah, in her precise and unhurried way, that there might be some media attention. "I figured," Sarah said. "You handled the situation with a great deal of courage." "I handled it without thinking." "I'm not sure that's courage." "What do you think courage is?" Sarah thought about it. "Acting when you know the risk and doing it anyway. And if the risk isn't fully processed before the action, then it's just reflex. Conditioning." Dr. Webb looked at her for a long moment with eyes that had been, over 35 years in medicine, conditioned to see through the particular kind of self-deprecation people use to avoid accepting something true about themselves. "Your father was a police officer," she said. 30 years. What does he think?" Sarah smiled. And it was a smaller smile than usual, the kind that forms around something tender. "He hasn't stopped calling since noon. I finally answered around 1. He said," she stopped. "What did he say?" "He said he was proud of me." She paused. "And then he said next time I should back up and call 911 like a normal person." Dr. Webb, who did not smile often or easily, smiled. "That," she said, "sounds exactly right." On the 4th day after the incident, Jake Torres was moved from the ICU to a standard recovery room. On the 5th day, his visitors exceeded the hospital's posted maximum by approximately 11 people, and the nursing staff at Station 4B developed what one of the floor nurses described as a complicated relationship with the Iron Black MC. They were not difficult. They were not patients at all. Most of them, just visitors. But they were large and numerous and leather-jacketed and arrived at all hours with a relentlessness that suggested they had no other obligations, which Sarah happened to know was not true. Ghost ran a business. Danny was in his last year of community college. Dex had a 6-year-old at home. They came because Jake was recovering and they needed to see him. And because the thing that had happened on Meridian Avenue was still moving through the chapter like a current, and being near Jake and near the hospital where it was being resolved was how they processed it. Sarah came to check on him too, though she told herself, with limited success, that this was professional habit. On the 5th day, she ran into Ghost in the corridor outside Jake's room. He was standing there with 2 coffees from the place down the street. She'd seen them bring the coffee in before, avoiding the vending machine, and when he saw her, he held one out. "You take it black, right?" he said. She blinked. "How do you know that?" "Vending machine, night of. You didn't put anything in it." She took the coffee. "You noticed that?" "I noticed things." He leaned against the wall. "He's awake. Been asking about you." "About me?" "You held his hand the whole ride in." He remembers that. Something more moved through her chest that she categorically refused to examine. "I was monitoring his pulse." "You were holding his hand." "I was monitoring his pulse by holding his hand." Ghost looked at her over his coffee cup with an expression she was beginning to recognize as his version of amusement. "Sure," he said. "You want to see him?" She didn't want to see him. She went in. Jake Torres, lying in a hospital bed with an IV in his arm and a bandage across his left flank, and a hospital gown that fit him approximately as well as you would expect a hospital gown to fit a man built the way Jake Torres was built, was looking significantly better than the last time she'd seen him. The color was back. The eyes were sharp. He watched her come in with an expression she couldn't quite read, and then he said, in that low gravel voice, "You're the nurse." "Sarah," she said. "Sarah Chun. Sarah Chun." He said her name the way he'd said things about his house, with deliberate attention, like something worth keeping. "They told me what you did." "I did my job," she said. "You didn't," he said simply. "This," he gestured, carefully, at the room, at himself, at the IV and the monitors, and the general fact of his continued existence, "isn't your job. This is something else." He looked at her. "This is my life. You kept my life." She didn't have anything to say to that. Not because she disagreed, exactly, but because the directness of it, no deflection, no performance, was the kind of thing that strips away whatever you were planning to say. "How's the pain?" she asked instead. "Manageable." A pause. "How's the shoulder?" "How do you know about?" "Ghost told me about the crowbar." Something moved across his face. "I'm sorry that happened." "Don't be. It worked." That's a very nurse way to look at a crowbar to the shoulder. Occupational conditioning. He almost smiled. Not quite, but the shape of it was there. "They fixed the porch," he said, after a moment. "What?" "Ghost. He went to my house yesterday. Fixed the boards on the back porch." He paused. 8 years I said I was going to do that." She thought about the night on the pavement, the rain, his voice going rough and steady through the story of the first floor. "You told me about that porch," she said. "I remember," he said. "You kept me talking. I knew what you were doing." "Did it work?" "I'm here, aren't I?" On the 7th day, Ghost called a church. This was the term they used for a formal chapter meeting. Church, the specific formality of everyone in their seat, the door closed. The business of the club conducted in the structured ritual the club had maintained for 30 years. Ghost had called church for births and deaths and crises and decisions that needed the weight of the whole chapter behind them. He called it now for a debt. "We have a debt," he said, standing at the head of the table. He did not say it like a question. He said it like a fact that had been established by the laws of the universe and was now simply being acknowledged. Jake is alive because a woman named Sarah Chun didn't keep driving when every reasonable instinct told her to. She fought for him when she had no obligation to. She kept him breathing until help came. She held his hand. He paused. "In this club, in 19 chapters across 6 states, we have one principle that has never changed and will never change. You stand for the people who stand for you. That's it. That's the whole code. You stand for the people who stand for you." Nobody spoke. Sarah Chun has no idea this is being discussed. She's not expecting anything. She went back to her job on Wednesday, 13-hour shift, same as always. She drives a 10-year-old Honda with 200,000 miles on it. She has one credit card and a student loan she's still paying off. She lives in a 2-bedroom apartment with a cat, and she makes $61,000 a year working nights and weekends in an emergency room. He let that sit. She could have kept driving. Bulldog, who was not given to making speeches, said she didn't. "No," Ghost said. "She didn't." He looked around the table. "So, the question in front of this church is how we stand for Sarah Chun." The discussion lasted 40 minutes. The number that came out of it was proposed by Danny Cub, the youngest person at the table, the prospect, technically not yet with full voting rights, who raised his hand at the 20-minute mark and said, in the specific way of someone who has been calculating on his phone under the table, $100,000. Everyone looked at him. "The club has it," Danny said. "The repair shop had a good year. The last 2 events cleared $20K each. We have it. And I think," he paused, looking at Ghost, "I think a dollar amount that is genuinely life-changing is the only thing that matches what she did. Because what she did was genuinely life-changing." Another silence. Ghost looked at Danny for a long moment with the particular attention he gave to things that surprised him. All in favor, he said. Every hand at the table went up. Every single one. They spent the next 3 days working out the logistics. Ghost was meticulous about this. The money would be cash, not because the club was averse to transparency, but because cash was honest, cash was direct, cash said this is real in a way that a check or a wire transfer never could. It would be delivered in person. It would not be a quiet exchange. It would be something she could see and feel the weight of, something that communicated, through its sheer physical presence, the seriousness with which they took what she had done. Jake wanted to be there. Dr. Adeyemi cleared him for a brief outing on day 11, technically against the spirit if not the letter of his discharge instructions, and Jake did not mention this detail to Dr. Adeyemi. Danny, who had turned out to have a gift for logistics that nobody at the chapter had previously identified, handled the choreography. He found out Sarah's schedule from the hospital's posted staff board. He found her address. He organized the chapter with the focused efficiency of someone who understood that this moment needed to be done correctly or not at all. 30 bikes. Mike Soto asked. 30 bikes, Ghost confirmed. In front of her building? In front of her building. Dex, who was road captain and therefore responsible for the actual logistics of moving 30 motorcycles through a city, made a face that suggested he had concerns about parking. Figure it out, Ghost said. Dex figured it out. He called the local precinct. The precinct had complicated feelings about the Iron Black MC, but could not find a specific reason not to cooperate with a request to temporarily occupy one block of a residential street, especially given the context, which had been briefly described, in which the desk sergeant had chosen, for reasons of departmental morale, not to officially ignore. Sarah Chun found out about it at 6:47 p.m. on a Friday. Not from the club. She found out from Linda Reyes, who called her in the muted near panic that was Linda's register for situations she found intensely important. Sarah, Linda said, there are motorcycles outside your building. Sarah was in her kitchen. She was making rice. What? Motorcycles? Like many. Like the sound you associate with a motorcycle times. I don't know, 30? I'm looking out my window. A pause. Oh, Sarah. Oh my God. What is it? They all have the iron fist thing on their jackets. Sarah put down the wooden spoon. I'm hanging up, she said. She went to the window. 30 motorcycles were parked along the full length of her street, their engines off, their riders standing beside them, leather and denim and road-worn faces, in the particular quiet of people who have gathered for a purpose and are waiting for the moment to arrive. Ghost was at the front. Jake Torres was beside him. Jake, 11 days out of surgery, looking like he had been slightly modified but not diminished, was standing on the sidewalk in front of her building with his arms across his chest and his eyes on her second-floor window, and when she appeared in it, he looked directly at her and made a small, simple gesture. Come down. She came down. She stood on the front step in her socks. She hadn't thought to put shoes on, and she looked at 30 leather-jacketed men arranged along her street in the early evening light, and she said, because it was the first thing that came into her head, I'm making rice. A laugh went through the assembled riders like a wave. Ghost stepped forward. He was carrying something, a leather saddlebag, old and well-kept, that he held out to her with both hands. This is from the chapter, he said. From all of us. She took it. It was heavier than she expected. She opened it. Inside, bound in rubber bands and flat, neat stacks, was more cash than she had ever seen in one place. She didn't count it then. She didn't need to. She could feel the weight of it. And she understood from the weight of it that this was serious and large and real. Jake is my brother, Ghost said. He's been my brother for 19 years. You kept him alive. He paused. We don't forget that. This club has one law, and that law is, you stand for the people who stand for you. You stood for Jake. This is us standing for you. He extended his hand. The Iron Black MC considers you under our protection. Permanently. Any trouble, anything, you call Danny. He'll give you the number. You call that number, anytime, any reason, and someone comes. She was looking at the saddlebag. $100,000 in cash. On her front step. In her socks. She should have said something gracious. She had several gracious things she was theoretically capable of saying. She was a grown woman with functional social skills in a decade of navigating the emotional terrain of an emergency room. She had comforted the dying and the terrified and the furious and the lost. She was, by any measure, good with people. She started crying. Not dramatically, not the gasping, cinematic variety, but the kind that arrives before you've decided to allow it, a leakage around the edges of what you're holding, and once it started she couldn't immediately stop it. She heard the sound that went through the assembled riders, and it was the strangest sound she had ever heard from 30 large men in leather jackets. It was gentleness. Then Jake Torres walked up the 3 steps to where she was standing, and he said, very quietly, the way he talked on the pavement that night with his life running out of him, low and steady, a frequency that cut through. Hey, you okay? She laughed and cried at the same time, which she was aware was not dignified, and she said, I'm great. I'm great. You sure? I'm in my socks, she said. I forgot shoes. He looked down at her socks, which had small dogs printed on them, and the not-quite smile was back. Closer this time. Almost arriving. Next time, he said, wear shoes. Next time I'll try to be more prepared for being given $100,000. Yeah, we can work on the protocol. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Jake, she said. Yeah. How's the pain? Right now? He considered. Honestly, I don't feel a thing. Behind him, Ghost had turned back to the assembled chapter and was saying something quiet and direct that she couldn't hear. She would find out later, from Danny, that what he'd said was, okay, she's good. Let's give her street back. One by one, the riders of the Iron Black MC got on their bikes. One by one, the engines came to life, a sound that was, Sarah would think later, the most improbable lullaby she had ever heard. And one by one they pulled away from the curb and rode down her street. And when the last one had gone, the street was quiet again and ordinary again, and she was standing on her front step in her dog socks holding a leather saddlebag with $100,000 in it. And the rice was absolutely burning on the stove. 3 weeks later, Sarah Chun went back to work. She went back the way she always went back. In green scrubs, in the 10-year-old Honda, with a thermos of coffee and a bruise on her shoulder that had faded from purple to the particular yellow-green of a healing thing. She clocked in at 7 a.m. She checked the board. She went to work. The first patient of the shift was a 73-year-old man with chest pain that turned out, after 3 hours and an EKG, to be musculoskeletal rather than cardiac. The second was a 12-year-old with a broken wrist. The third was a young woman, 22, who had come in alone at 9 a.m. and sat in the waiting room for 40 minutes before saying why she was there. And when Sarah sat down beside her and asked what was going on, the young woman said, very quietly, I don't know how to be okay. Sarah had been in this moment before, many times. She knew the specific weight of it, the thing underneath the medical question that was the real question. She pulled a chair over and sat down. Okay, she said, tell me what's happening. She sat with her for 40 minutes. She did not rush her. She did not look at her phone. She found her a counselor in a room and a plan, and when the young woman left she was still fragile, but she was not alone, and there is a difference. Linda came by at noon with a sandwich and the expression of someone who had been containing a question all morning. Did you do anything with the money? She asked. Sarah had spent 3 days thinking about the money. She'd paid off the student loan, the whole thing, in one shot, which had produced in her a feeling she could only describe as a kind of physical lightness, as though something she'd been carrying in her chest for years had simply been set down. She'd put a new timing belt on the Honda, which had needed one for 2 years and which she had been, in her precise and practical way, scheduling around. She'd sent $20,000 to a medical debt relief organization that she'd been donating small amounts to for years, feeling now the particular pleasure of being able to do a thing properly that she'd previously only been able to do symbolically. The rest she had put in savings. She was not a person who made sudden large gestures with money. She was a person who made careful, practical decisions that compounded quietly over time. The money didn't change what she was. It changed what she could do with what she was, which was different and more interesting. Some of it, she told Linda. What did you do? Paid off the loan. Fixed the car. Donated some. A pause. Saved the rest. Linda looked at her. That's very you, she said. Is that bad? It's very, very you, Linda said. In the best possible way. Kevin Marsh was arrested 18 days after the incident. Troy Suggs, who had cooperated with investigators, received a reduced charge. Kevin Marsh was looking at 12 to 15 years, the district attorney's office confirmed, given the prior record and the shooting. Sarah was asked to testify. She said yes without hesitation. She did not, when people asked her about what she'd done, perform either modesty or bravado. She described it the way she described difficult procedures, with precision and without decoration, because that was the only honest way to describe it. She had seen a person in trouble. She had stopped. She had done what she could with what she had. That was the whole story. What she didn't say, What she thought in the hours that were dark and quiet, when Biscuit slept on the foot of her bed and the city ran its ambient hum outside the window, was that the $100,000 wasn't the thing. It was significant and real, and she was grateful for it in the specific way she was grateful for practical things that work properly. But the thing, the actual thing, was smaller and larger than money. It was what Ghost had said on the step. This club has one law. You stand for the people who stand for you. She thought about that a lot. About the simplicity of it. About how much of the difficulty of human life could be traced to the failure of that principle, and how much of the goodness of it, the moments that stuck and mattered and lasted, came from people choosing, when it was hard to choose it, to stand anyway. She thought about her father, who had been saying this her whole life without using those words. She thought about Jake Torres on the pavement, with his life running out of him, saying behind you to create a half-second distraction so she could get the crowbar, standing for her while she stood for him. Jake Torres was cleared for full activity 9 weeks after surgery. The back porch, Ghost and 3 other chapter members had rebuilt entirely in a single afternoon, 3 weeks after the incident. Jake had come home from a follow-up appointment to find it done, solid, weatherproofed, the new boards golden against the old frame of the house. He called Ghost. 8 years, he said. You were busy, Ghost said. I was going home that night. Just going home. I know. A pause. I keep thinking about her voice, Jake said. Just tell me about home. Keep talking. Like it was the most natural thing in the world. She's a nurse. It wasn't that, Jake said. It was, he stopped. Some people just have it. That thing where being present for someone isn't an effort. It's just how they are. Ghost didn't say anything. I'm going to ask her to dinner, Jake said. Ghost still didn't say anything. You think that's, I think, Ghost said. That's a question for her. Jake Torres called Sarah Chun 3 days later. She said yes. On a Sunday afternoon in late November, the light going gold and low through the windows of a restaurant on the south side, Sarah Chun sat across from Jake Torres and listened to him talk about a motorcycle trip he'd taken through New Mexico, and he listened to her talk about the time she'd accidentally locked herself out of the hospital break room for 4 hours on a night shift, and they ate pasta and drank wine and were, in the particular unhurried way of people who have met in a situation that burns away the usual pretenses entirely themselves. She noticed, at some point, that he had a habit of watching the door, not nervously, but with the calm awareness of a man accustomed to knowing what was happening around him. Ex-military? She asked. No, just habit. You pick things up. My dad's the same way. Cop. 30 years. He nodded. Something in the nod said that explains things. He wants to meet you, she said. My dad. Yeah. He watched the security footage. He called it technically efficient. Jake considered this. High praise. From my father? That's basically a standing ovation. He laughed, really laughed, for what she thought might be the first time she'd heard it fully, a low and genuine sound. And she laughed too. And outside the restaurant the city moved through itself in all its noise and collision and ordinary extraordinary life. There is a version of this story that ends with the money. In that version, the $100,000 is the point, and the point is that goodness is rewarded, and the reward validates the goodness, and everyone goes home satisfied. That version is not wrong, but it is incomplete. The more complete version is the one that includes a woman in green scrubs standing at the window of her second-floor apartment, looking down at 30 motorcycles and the particular silence of people who have come to honor something they don't have enough words for. The version that includes Jake Torres, 11 days out of surgery, walking up 3 steps with his hand pressed slightly to his left side to keep the movement from pulling the healing tissue, saying, "Hey, you okay?" The version that includes the rice burning on the stove and the dog's socks, and the way Ghost held out the saddlebag with both hands like it was something that deserved ceremony. The more complete version is the one that includes Ray Chun, a retired cop in Garfield Park, watching the same security footage on a loop at his kitchen table on a Wednesday morning. Not because he doubted what his daughter had done, but because he needed to see it, needed to have the evidence of it in front of him. When his wife Elena came in and found him there, she asked what he was doing, and he said watching, and she asked watching what, and he said quietly, her. Just her. The most complete version, though, the one closest to the truth of it, is not a dramatic one. It is this. On the Monday after dinner with Jake, Sarah Chin arrived at St. Augustine at 6:55 a.m., clocked in at 7 o'clock, got her board, and went to work. A man came in with a hand trapped in a piece of industrial equipment. A teenager came in with a fever of 104. An elderly woman came in alone at 2 p.m., confused and frightened. and Sarah sat with her and held her hand and talked to her in the patient, unhurried way she talked to people when they were afraid, until the woman's daughter arrived, breathless and apologizing. And the woman looked at Sarah and said, "Who are you?" And Sarah said, "I'm your nurse." And the woman said, "You have kind hands." And Sarah said, "Thank you." She drove home at 8:30 p.m. Biscuit was waiting, disapproving, by the food bowl. She fed him. She made tea. She stood at the window for a while, looking at the street below, at the ordinary movement of the city going about its business. Then she texted Jake Torres. "How's the side?" 3 dots appeared. "Better, every day." "How is the shift?" "Long," she wrote. "Good." She thought about that for a moment. The accuracy of it, the completeness of it. Long good. That was, she thought, exactly right. That was, when you got to the bottom of it, the whole thing. A person had been in trouble. She had stopped. She had done what she could. And the world, in its strange, imperfect, leather-jacketed, $100,000, back porch rebuilding way, had done what it does when people choose the hard thing. It had held her up.